It's last time, when there's a big crowd, we usually just keep questions down. But if you have questions, comments, please just fire them away. Are you okay with that, John?
Yeah, that'd be great.
So with that, I'll turn it over to you, John, and appreciate you putting this together and presenting. So.
All right. Well, thanks for coming, everyone. Now this is very similar to the slides that were delivered for the residential side of things, and a lot of these were just lifted from that presentation, and some commercial information was added to it. Excuse me. So there's a few things that are, I'll make corrections if there's one graphic that I noticed was just a little bit different, but it's pretty good, and we're just going to go through these pretty quick. So first of all, our mission statement is Kaysville City Power and Light mission is to safely provide reliable electricity with superior customer service at a competitive price to the residents and businesses in Kaysville City. That is our main goal there, is make it reliable and competitive. If we can do that, then great. Everything else is icing. So a little bit of the background. The residential solar kind of started the whole board getting together, and all of last year we hammered out the issues with residential solar, and we came to a solution and presented it to the city council, and they voted it in. So, so the basic. This is just a quick overview of how you decide and how you set the rates. I'm just going to go through these fairly quickly. So there's different pools of money. There's operating expenses, administration, and then there's debt requirements. We got to have cash for future things. And then, so it makes up the total revenue requirement. And that splits up a few ways. We've got our generation, transmission line, and distribution. So the generation would be the plants. Transmission is how we get it from those far distant plants to the city, and then distribution in the city to the local businesses and residences. And a lot of these costs will vary, and solar will sometimes remove some of these costs. It'll offset, and sometimes it won't. There's variable and fixed costs with all of these. And so there's all these different buckets that we have put the costs into. An energy bucket, so we've got the fuel costs, and those are variable. Fixed costs are the infrastructure and operation and maintenance. There's also a peak demand bucket, which is kind of like we have to be able to supply the peak load whether we're using it or not. It just has to be there for when we do need it, and there is some extra cost there. And there's also fixed and variable costs for the transmission line. And there's also fixed and variable costs for the distribution. We've got meters and service lines and billing and things like that. So all these different costs add up to different parts of the bill. And here's a typical, now this is a residential customer's usage. This is one thing I'd noticed, that this chart would be different for a commercial customer or industrial. They're going to have, if it's like a Maverick, you're going to have a lot of usage during the day, and maybe not less at night. Maybe it's going to go all night. So it does go down. Okay, so it's not going to look just like this. But the solar one, the sun is going to shine the same time of day, so you're going to have some input from solar that's going to offset some usage. So with solar, the variable fuel, it could avoid some of those, especially in the middle of the day. It's going to avoid some of you're going to use less energy, so you don't have to build out the infrastructure as much, potentially. But then there's some costs that it's not going to avoid. The peak demand, if you go back to this chart here, solar is kind of ramping down when this peak demand curve is really high. But that may change, that actually could change for a commercial application. If commercial's peak is in the middle of the day when solar's happening, then that would avoid that cost as well. And transmission, it's going to avoid some of those costs, some of them not, because the lines still have to be there whether you're producing power or not. Distribution, some aren't, it's really not going to affect some things. The infrastructure is already there. So total dollar amount for the whole city, the whole expense is $14 million. There's some numbers that we set aside for different future projects and cash reserve that we have to have. And this is just how the numbers kind of split up here. Transmission line splits up a couple different ways. I'm just going to go through these fairly quickly, if that's all right. Stop me if you have a question about any of this. Peak demand, the numbers, 5 million of that goes towards the distribution of peak demand and energy consumption. Altogether, the numbers kind of, the total distribution part, residential is the bulk of our customers. Small commercial, medium and large commercial, and one industrial customer. And cost of service. This is how all the numbers break down. I want to skip ahead a little bit here. Okay. Sure, to this one? So commercial A is customers whose peak load is 0 to 9 up to 9 kilowatts of peak load. Commercial B would be 9 to 38 kilowatts. Commercial C would be 38 kilowatts, greater than 38. So Maverick, you mentioned you're around 200 kilowatts, so you would definitely be in this class C of commercial.
So is the peak cost allocated, or are they measured across the demands? Like is the current demand curve commercial?
It's measured at the highest 15-minute period during the day, or during the whole month. It holds that highest one.
I'm saying, so the demand charges that are incurred for service, not how it's billed, but in cost of service, is that calculated or allocated? Because like I say, if the demand curves during the day when you have high generation solar or other demands are not high on the grid, that extra demand from a commercial customer is not going to cost the same as the high demand when everybody else is demanding.
If solar is able to offset your highest peak, then that would help you.
I'm just talking more in general for the total utility of Kaysville.
Yeah, so I think, go ahead.
They do not know what time of day your peak occurred, so no, they're not calculating that.
So, and I think the way to look at that is we have, and Bruce, help me, it's 7 contracts, right, total with other providers to provide us power?
There are 8 now.
8 now? Mm-hmm. Okay. So what you have, we have 8 different providers that provide us power to the city. And what we look at is what is the peak that we need. So right now our peak in summer peak is right around 40 megs. 46 megawatts. So even though you have, and this is one thing that was kind of eye-opening when we joined the board here, was even though we have solar that contributes to decreasing that demand, in the summer months we will exceed that 46 megawatts sometimes and have to do spot purchasing. So we can go up to 46 megawatts in the other months, even though we may not, we may have 17 megawatts in January. Our curves really go like that and then in the summer we're peaking for 46 megs. So we're that's how we're distributing where that peak money comes from, is that 46 megawatts on peak.
So commercial A customers, this is how their new rate structure would fall. The first 1,000 kilowatt hours, they'd be paying about 8 cents. From 1,000 to 9,000, they'd be paying 5.8 cents. And above 9,000 kilowatt hours, they'd be paying about 4.3 cents. per kilowatt hour. And there would be a customer charge, monthly charge of $11 a month, and no demand charge. They're essentially, kind of a residential customer in a lot of aspects. So there's no demand charge. Customer class B, from 9 kilowatts to 38 kilowatts.
Go back to that one real quick.
Sure.
So, and I think just to clarify, this is the rates that they will be paying, independent of solar. This will just be the rates that
Is
you
this
pick.
one's gonna change, right? I mean, that's changed from what's been in the past.
That's what we're
That's the
proposing,
new
is to change all of these rates.
Oh, thank you.
Did we adopt our new rate schedule?
They did, you're right, they did. This was adopted, so you actually should see this as of January 1st. The commercial rates, not the solar rates yet. Thank you.
So customer class B, from 9 kilowatts of 8 to 38 kilowatts of demand, about 8 cents for the first tier, second tier about 5.8 cents, and the third tier above 9,000 kilowatt hours a month be about 4.3 cents again. And their customer charge is $13 a month, and they will have a demand of $11.59 per kilowatt. So if say they fall into 10 kilowatts of demand, they would be paying $116 just in demand. Commercial C, above 38 kilowatts of demand. Very similar numbers again. 8 cents, 5.8 cents, and above 9,000, 4.26 cents per kilowatt hour, And their customer charge is $59 a month, and demand charge currently is $11.59, and a full cost, it'll go up to $14.49 in 2019. And I don't remember if that's already accepted that going into effect, or if that's something we have to vote in later.
Stepping up a second time.
Yeah, I think this was Bruce, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that they accepted that, and the reason for doing that is just because the demand charges that were in place were so far off that we decided to do it in scales.
Yeah.
So, and they accepted even the proposal for 19, correct?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So now talking about solar credit. And this is proposed. This hasn't been, actually,
They didn't approve.
we haven't approved this yet. Okay. So for up to the first 1,000 kilowatt hours, 6.18 cents. For up to 9,000 kilowatt hours, the credit would go down to 4.46 cents per kilowatt hour, so really this is basically the same as the cost of electricity, but about 1.9 cents less. The second tier, 4.46 cents. That's about 1.5 cents less. And then the third tier, I'm just kind of going back and forth here, 4.26, and the credit is 3.2, so it's about a penny less than what you'd be paying for it. And this is similar to the residential side. The residential side is about 2.2 cents different, pretty much across the board. And the reason why these are a lot more, it's covering very similar, is because the demand is the demand of the commercial customers typically consume in the time that their solar is producing. So it actually is probably very little would be pushed back to the grid. Now this is something. Now the solar array will be connected to the line side. Now, this is something we still need to kind of hash out, I think.
Yeah. So right now, what we're proposing is a line side connection. So it would be a feed-in tariff arrangement as opposed to residential, where residential is a net metered arrangement. So this would be sending electrons. You know, if you look at the meter, you'd be tied on the line side, which would be the utility side. And Kaysville's only installation is currently set up that way. So essentially you'd have a meter here. You'd have 2 meters, one for your solar array and one for your building. And that's what we've proposed, though, is that setup.
So if you're gonna do that, what if you do a self-contained battery solar array?
So this is exactly what we're working through. Is the disadvantage of this setup is how do you handle the demand side management with an encouraged battery management. And one of the things that we're looking at is in the accounting. So the one way you can look at that is in the accounting you can true up the nets, and we're making sure that our software will actually be able to handle that. So basically, let me give you a good example. Let's say you have 100 kW of load, and then you have let's say 100 kW of solar. And what we were looking at, and we're playing with the ideas, is it possible to just true net those, you know, take those two, take the exact timestamps and subtract them out. So that's something we're still working through, and we definitely don't have closure on that as far as, you know, battery storage. But what we do know is, you know, where we're headed is in the time of use, and we're really trying to push. We want to incentivize, you know, battery storage and increase the incentive for on-peak power. So something we still are working through, to be honest.
One thing to think about as you're considering through that, especially if there is counter-cyclical demand, commercial versus residential, that you may want to incorporate having a full system connectivity such that you could actually pull on a commercial battery pack during residential demand to minimize the overall utility demand charge. I mean, when you look at it, and that's 40%, 30% of your total cost.
Right.
Yep.
That excessive peak. You know, if you have a countercyclical that way, and then probably needs to be a different incentive than the solar incentive to be able to run that.
I think just having a battery on your site would, you know, that alone, you know, eliminating that demand charge just makes the battery work out really well.
For an individual consumer, for our business, you know, we're evaluating doing battery packs because demand charges are so high. If I'm paying $2,000 a month in demand charges, and I can go buy a $100,000 battery pack to eliminate that $2,000 charge, you know, it pays back 20% to do that.
Right.
If I can offset dollar for dollar, if I'm taking a 1 or 2 cent haircut on it, you know, it cuts into that. But what I'm saying is that my demand charge, when I'm hitting peak demand, may not be when the utility is hitting peak demand. And therefore, I have an incentive to cut it when you don't need power cut. You actually would rather have us not use the battery in our peak demand, because you may not have peak utility demand, but wanted rather use it when you have peak utility demand. And say, we'd rather you release that power to your station when other people are pulling higher power to reduce the overall network power demand. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Obviously, it only works if you've got a large enough size that makes a difference.
That's right.
But if you send commercial to do that kind of thing, you're going to eliminate, obviously, probably offset their demand charge, is what I would recommend. Even if you shift the demand, the peak demand draw you take from the battery pack.
Right. Yeah,
If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's a good suggestion, and something we'll have to dive into as far as, you know, because at the end of the day, instead of needing what you're saying, right, instead of needing 8 contracts to supply the 46 or buy spot peak, we'd essentially buy spot peak from you,
Right.
or a commercial customer.
Yeah, and counterbalanced against the demand charge they could have avoided by using it for their own benefit.
That's right.
Rather use it for the utility's overall benefit.
That's right.
So for us, we're looking, I mean, if we do a 30 kilowatt solar array, which is probably not all we do on our canopy, but we probably do a 100 kilowatt battery pack.
Right.
Because if, we've got 200 kilowatt demand cycle, then, cut that in half.
Right. Okay. We'll look through that and see, and I mean, that's exactly why we're having this, is to say, hey, what should we look at? What questions do we have? And so definitely keep them coming. We appreciate it.
Because that's where the challenge is going to come in any power grid management, is the individual's incentive versus the utility's incentive. And part of this is how you're all restructuring this, is it's ultimately the best benefit comes when the utility is optimized rather than the individual.
Right. That's right. Exactly right.
Something we're looking into, something we will be doing in the future on the residential side is a time of use structure instead of a tiering structure. And we haven't looked into this on the commercial side, but that might be something to look into, is having a time of use structure for the commercial side as well instead of a tier.
Yeah, I'm taking notes, so that's something we can. I'll add to the next agenda, and we'll look at that as well. So.
Okay, so I'm just reading this note on the bottom. In the future, net demand and production may be introduced in the billing and solar credit as hourly metering. There we go. So as production data becomes available.
Yeah, so our solution right there is exactly that, right? Is to put it through the software and just pull each meter, and that's the only way that we've found in a feed-in tariff to actually true net those and still incentivize demand and still incentivize battery storage.
And that's the end of the presentation.
So if the true net cost of demand, as you're saying, if you go on a tier of a C class, customers $14.59 per kilowatt.
That's right.
Yes.
I'm trying to think in my mind
Yeah, 1459.
how that plays against a battery pack cost.
And now these numbers were, we had a consultant, I forget his name, Mark Beauchamp? Beauchamp. Yeah, he studied these things. He came up with these numbers for us based on our current system. So we'll have to look at that again as time of use comes online.
So,
And it goes back to this chart here. Let me see if this is it here. Let me find it here. There's a peak demand. That's actually a lot of our expense, and we spend a lot of money. The power company spends a lot of money, and then we pay a lot of money for this service to having that peak available. And so it's a very expensive piece that isn't used for very much, and so that's why that demand charge was calculated the way it was. And $14.49 sounds really high, but then the numbers just kind of worked out that way.
If you look at most of the utilities that we're involved with, somewhere between $11 to $15 a kilowatt for demand. It's pretty consistent.
I think it's ironic that the worse the numbers are, the higher they are, the more battery starts penciling out.
And I think if you look at that, just to follow up, if you had a 1459 at 100 kW per month, so to your point, 1459 times 100 It's $1,459 a month savings. So essentially, your net savings for a year would be $17,500.
But you can never zero out your demand.
Yeah, and so I was just halving the demand.
Okay.
So they've got a 200 kW demand. I just took 100 kW to kind of give you a snapshot. That's about the savings that you would see half of your demand per year for that demand charge, for that demand reduction.
Curious, does power for Maverick, is that a three-phase power that comes in? Okay. So any other questions on that or comments?
I think maybe scroll down to I just wanted to look at the pie breakdown. Keep going just a little bit, and click that down 2 slides.
That one there?
Yep.
Oops, where'd it go?
So our peak charges are the 2 million, and then we've broke it down per customer, to your point, and then there's in a category that would fall into where you're seeing your demand charges, we're at around 864,000 of that is because of commercial demand on the utility grid.
But again, that's not measured necessarily time of day, it's just said at any point in the day.
That's accurate.
That's right. I think, going forward, as it gets more sophisticated and have more distributed
Mhm.
power generation,
Yep,
actually time of day matters.
that's right.
Because if the peak demand is hitting at a time where you have low and you're already paying your minimum power that you have to pay for, it doesn't affect the utility at all, so why charge the customer additionally?
That's right.
But if it's hitting when you're having to pay extra on spot, that's where you really gotta nail it.
You're
That's
exactly.
what I'm saying, you need to make sure that there's a balance through solar and also thinking about battery incentive for customers. You really want to make sure you're incentive not to optimize their bill, but to optimize the entire utility bill.
That's really smart. Yep, I'm with you. So I'll take that and we'll add it. But that's so.
So you may want to consider a tiered
Yeah.
time of use demand charge.
That's right.
To say that if you're pulling on off peak,
Yep.
your demand, maybe it's half the price of the 14, but if you're pulling it during peak demand, you're paying $20 a kilowatt.
Yep, I'm with you. Yeah, so we'll look at something. Schedule 2, Rocky Mountain Power has the electric car charger, and what they do is they do the exact same thing. Is from all but the morning peak, it's basically free demand, and the residential is free demand, but they're really reduced their rates, and then they have an on peak, and then they have a basically in between hours, and then they have a huge cost like 34 cents a kilowatt hour, and then it goes down to nothing. So what you're saying is do the exact same thing with demand, but do time of day usage. So basically what you're saying is same thing with time of day is increase or decrease your demand charges depending on what the utility is peaking, not just what they're actually using. That's a good idea. It's a really good idea. Do you have comments on that, Bruce? Thoughts?
No, yeah, that's the direction we should go, for sure.
Okay.
A lot more flexibility and make everything, equal out with when we have time of use, so.
Okay.
Is there any additional expense for the local utility when you have a demand that's really fast? Like, say all of a sudden just someone ramps up a megawatt, but we're well below our peak. Does that add complexity to our local infrastructure here?
No, it's all part of the same, you get
Okay.
one bill or whatever, so.
Okay.
Timing involved with
You
it.
have to have your distribution system designed to handle that.
Right, as long as you're not exceeding anything, though.
But there's an investment there.
Okay.
Your transformer has to be big enough to handle it.
Right.
And
The
that goes
distribution
into the
circuits.
smart grid. The more you know where your demands are coming and when they're coming, then you only have to beef up the grid in the areas necessary rather than across the whole transmission. That's where distributed power generation and flexibility will have a big impact
I take that back though. There are energy imbalance markets, EIMs, where, I mean, they have UAMPS every 15 minutes has to sit, decide there's going to be this much total load, and if it goes over that, they get dinged. So we will be getting, they will get charges if we get, if we fluctuate like that.
And to that point, I think that what you're saying is spot on, because I think what we could be doing is we could be dumping into a commercial customer's battery if they're willing to do it, or pull from it, because I think the thing that's most people forget is we need the electrons today are instantaneous, and once they're gone, right? So I think that's a good point of just if you had a 100 kW battery and you could use it how you wanted, we could use his battery how we wanted. I think that's a good point. So, and incentivize that.
Well, and ultimately, as a utility, you're going to have to evaluate whether your fluctuations, whether it makes sense for Kaysville Power to have its own battery pack that mitigates those spike demands that you're paying a big price for that, versus you could manage that within, whether it's you have to have a 1 megawatt battery set.
About 11 megawatts. It's not feasible. So yeah.
But you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, eventually, someday.
Because I mean, if you cut $3 million in half by managing it distributed, you can get quite a bit of, for $1.6 million, you can get quite a bit of battery capacity.
Exactly.
If you only do it once, and you're not going to pay it every year.
That's right.
The return is huge.
That's right.
Okay, well, that's all I have on the presentation here.
When do you guys vote on that again?
I don't know when we're going to vote on it. We still have to discuss it a little bit.
So right now, what we'll do is we'll take any inputs. So you have some time, and we're a little short-staffed as far as voting and things like that. So we've been pushing some of that off, but we can we'll send out when we're planning. But next, what I would tell you is we'll take everything we have in here. We'll start discussing it this month, and then any of your topics, we may invite you back, or we might say, hey, give us a little more insight on those or those types of things. And then we'll definitely make sure that you guys are in the loop. And I have Andre's, but if I can get your contact, then I can make sure and let you know when, hey, the final plan is put together and this is final what we're proposing. But I would say in the next, I know we're trying to move it as fast as possible, but I'd say probably in the next, realistically, 2 months is probably a good target for us. You guys tell me what you think.
I'd say, 2 months, maybe 3.
Yeah. So.
We'd like to get something going before the peak of the summer.
Okay, well, with that, we appreciate your time. If there's anything else, we'll just do a little break for 15 minutes, and we'll start our next meeting.